Hi, everybody. My name is Randy. I'll be your host today for the webinar. Thank you all for coming. And I just have a couple of things for all of you. If you have any questions for the presenter, you can type into the questions box. We will have a question session at the end. The webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on BERNINA.com and YouTube next week. If you are in an Apple device, either an iPad or an iPhone, if you cannot see the screen, make sure you swipe left or right. Questions are going to be like in the lower right side of your device. I don't believe we have any handouts today. If you experience any audio or visual issues once the webinar begins, please follow these steps. Exit the webinar and then close your browser, relaunch your browser, and then re-enter the webinar. If you miss any of the steps, don't worry, because the broadcast is being recorded and you can watch it on BERNINA.com and YouTube as it uploads. With that being said, I'm going to turn you over to Hayley, who will be our presenter for the day, and I will see you all later.
Thanks, Randy. All right. You want to deactivate the screen share real quick, Randy? Thank you. All right. So welcome to the webinar. Thank you all for joining me today. I'm Hayley Grzych. I'm a BERNINA educator. And today I'm going to walk you through making this super cute little project. I actually have it here with me. It's a little birth announcement banner. We have we're going to do some embroidery, design editing with software, laying out this design and finishing on the overlocker. So what I'm going to do today with you guys, we're going to talk about the supplies you'll need for this project. I'll actually show you how I set this design up in software. Then we'll talk about stitching it out, and then the final construction and like finishing with that overlocker stitch, and then some details at the end. So first, let's talk about our machine and accessories. Like I mentioned, we're going to set up this design using the BERNINA Embroidery Software, either version 8 or 9 you can use. I'm going to be demonstrating on version 8.2 because I assume that's what most of you guys have out there. Version 9 is very new. I'm going to be stitching this project out on the BERNINA 790 Plus, and we'll need the embroidery module, obviously, for that. We'll need the drop-shaped embroidery foot, number 26. And then your embroidery hoop. So you could use the midi, maxi, or jumbo hoop, depending on the machine that you use at home. The midi is going to be the largest hoop for a 5 series machine. The maxi is the largest space on the 7 series, and the jumbo is going to be for the 8 series machine. Not to say you couldn't use a smaller hoop on a larger machine. It's all up to you on what size you want your design to be. And what best fits your machine. And then finally, as I mentioned, I'm going to be using the overlocker to finish the edge on this banner, and I'm going to be using the BERNINA L890. That is a combination overlock and cover stitch machine. Next, we'll talk about the sewing supplies. You're going to need half a yard of your main fabric, the fabric you're actually going to be embroidering on. For this, I recommend something that's a little bit thicker, more stable than like a quilting cotton. I love a linen or a canvas for this. I actually use the Robert Kaufman Big Sur canvas. It's a really nice heavy cotton canvas, or like duck cloth. You'll need a half yard of a backing fabric. This can be anything. I just use a solid quilting cotton on the back of mine. You'll need your embroidery threads. I use and suggest Isacord thread. We'll need a fabric marking pen. You want to make sure that that is easily removable. You'll need thread snips, some fray check, embroidery needles for your machine. I suggest size 75, and some stabilizers. So we're going to be using OESD's Fusible Woven, their poly mesh cutaway stabilizer, and the Stitch 2.0 wash away stabilizer. So that's it for the supplies and things we need to get started. Now let's take a look at setting up our design. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be using the embroidery software version 8.2, and the things that we're going to be doing in the software today include designing our lettering, combining designs, and changing the colors in the design. Now these are things that you don't necessarily need software to do, but you can do them much quicker and with a lot better precision when you're doing it in software. It's quite a bit more powerful than the features in your machine, but really just for ease of use and, like I said, precision, software is my favorite. It's my preference over doing things in the machine. So I'm gonna share my screen actually, and we're gonna set this design up together. So here is the version 8 software, and I'm going to send this full screen so you can see everything I'm doing here. The first thing that I'm going to do when I open up my software is I have my screen blank. I do not like the grid or hoop active when I'm starting just designing a design. I like to clear everything out so I have a truly blank canvas to look at and work with. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up my lettering. So in the left toolbar here under Digitize, I'm going to go down to Lettering and use that tool. So I'll just click on my screen, and we'll start with the baby's name for our birth announcement. You will put the name of your new loved one, but for today, I'm just going to write baby's name. And I'm going to type that out, and when I hit Enter, that lettering is now embroidery. I want to edit my lettering. I'm going to change the font because this sans serif font is a little bit boring for what I want. And to do that, I want to open the Object Properties menu. There's a couple ways you can get there. You can right-click the object and go to that menu, or you can just double-click it, and that menu will open up automatically. So it's going to open to the lettering tab of the Object Properties menu because you selected lettering. There's a ton that you can do in here to really fine-tune your lettering. We're going to keep it a little simple today, and all I really want to do is change the font. In this drop-down menu are all of the fonts that are built into my embroidery software. There are a ton built in. Anything with this little red kind of zigzag stitch icon next to the font name means that it is an embroidery font. So these are things that are built into the BERNINA embroidery software. You have some 3D fonts. So these are literally going to stitch out more three-dimensional and raised, textured away from your fabric. And then you have some other ones here. You can kind of preview them here, but whatever you select, say I want to look at this font, you can select it and then hit apply, and you'll be able to see what it actually looks like with the text that you typed out. So you have these fonts that are built into your software, but if you keep scrolling down, you'll see more down here that have this little TT icon next to them, and that means true type. So these fonts are not limited to your embroidery software. These are fonts that you're going to find elsewhere on your computer, like Microsoft Word or other design software, like if you use Photoshop or Illustrator, InDesign, anything like that. These are specifically designed to be able to use in a lot of different platforms, one of which being the embroidery software. Some of these are built into your computer, but you can also download these from the internet. You can find other ones, more decorative fonts, if there's one in here if there aren't any in here that really suit your needs. There's tons that you can download for free if you're just using it for your own personal use. If you are maybe starting an embroidery company though, you're going to be selling the things that you're embroidering, you will want to purchase a license to use any fonts that you download from the internet. So you have tons of options here, and like I said, not limited even to just what's in the software. You can go out on the internet and find exactly what you're looking for. The font that I want to use is at the very bottom of my list. It's this font called Hello Honey, and it's just a really cute kind of handwritten script looking font. It's very trendy right now. So I'm going to hit apply and OK, because that's all I need to do to change my font right now, or change my lettering. So the next line of lettering that I want to add is the birth date. So I can copy this lettering. I'm using my keyboard shortcuts, a Control-C and a Control-V to paste. So it's now basically duplicated. And when I open my object properties, I can change the text in here. So I'll just make this today's date, October 22nd, 2021, apply, and OK. And we'll paste again for a third row, again, open here. And I'm going to use, include the baby's birth weight. For our hypothetical baby, we'll be very generous to its parents and say 7 pounds and I don't know, 3 ounces. A nice, modest, small baby. And hit apply and OK. So here are my 3 lines of text. I'm going to do a little bit of positioning right now, just to basically orient these to one another. I'm going to turn my grid on now for this, so that I have some visual reference points. So because this date is the widest line of text, and it's going to be my middle, I want to orient the top line and the bottom line to this one and center them together. So there's a few ways I can do that. I can visually drag and drop to align these. My center for this one is falling on this line, so I can place this one here, and we'll move the bottom line that way. And you can also select everything, then go down to our Arrange tab in the toolbar and align centers vertically. And it'll do all of that work, you know, in the software without you having to eyeball it. So I'm going to play with the spacing vertically just a little bit on these, now that they're aligned vertically. And that looks pretty good to me. So the next thing we need to do is add the wreath design that is going to go around this lettering. So I'm going to go to File and Insert Embroidery. Make this window a little bit smaller. Now, when you purchase and download any embroidery design files, you'll have your choice of some different file types to use. We look at them as kind of 2 different types, even though there are multiple file formats. So there's basically like a working editable art file, and then there's a machine file. So Bernina's, we prefer an EXP for actually stitching out the design. But if you want to take your design into software and make any sort of changes to it, you're going to have the best results using the art file. That ART is which is our, you know, editable kind of native file for embroidery designs. There's a lot more information in that menu. So as you are editing and scaling and everything, the resulting stitch out file is going to be a lot better quality than if you try to make those changes to an EXP. If you purchase a design from OESD, from embroideryonline.com, you will have the option of the ART file as well as a variety of machine files, not just for Bernina. You can have like your JEFs, the PES, whatever your machine may be, you have the option for that stitch out file. So I'm going to select my ART file for this design and insert that. And is moving very slow with me trying to capture both of these things on the screen. I'm going to take my selection tool and highlight everything that I have on screen here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to group my text together so that the software is looking at all of my text as one object, and then select everything. And I will align the centers vertically and the horizontal, align centers horizontally as well, so that my text is centered and my wreath is centered. As is, my text is either too big to fit inside the wreath, or the wreath is too small to contain the text. At this point, you need to to make a couple decisions. One, what size do you want the resulting? If you're working on like a 5 series machine and you're using that MIDI hoop, you're going to want to probably keep the wreath about the same size. When I select it, I can see the size up here, and it's about 5.5 inches square. So I really can't make this a whole lot bigger and still have it fit in that MIDI hoop. Alternatively, you know, and so in order for this to fit well in the MIDI hoop, I'm going to have to make my text smaller. But I'm working on a 7 series, and so I have a little bit more wiggle room. So I'm going to take this wreath. So I don't really want to make my text smaller. I'm going to select the wreath design and making sure that this icon here is locked proportionately for my scaling. I'm going to make the widest dimension of the wreath 8 inches. And so that's a little bit better fit. I think I can fit this lettering in here pretty well now. So now I just want to position the lettering inside this negative space of the wreath. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and I'm going to ungroup my text using my keyboard shortcuts there. So first I'm going to position, that keyboard shortcut didn't work. So I'm going to position this center line, the date, first. Because it's that widest piece, it's going to have the least amount of flexibility of where I can move it. And I'm just going to move it down a little bit. And because the negative space inside this wreath isn't perfectly symmetrical, centering mathematically may not necessarily look visually centered. So I can play with this, and I'm not worrying about it being off center as long as it looks right to me visually. Because this little flower kind of comes in a little bit more towards the center. And so I'm bumping this text over to the right a little bit so that it looks centered visually. I'm going to bring it down a little bit so that we have a little bit more room up top here. I think I want to make the baby's name a little bit more prominent and make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to slide the date down a little, and my weight, I'm going to bring it over so it nests nicely in the negative space down here. All right, these two look pretty good to me. Now I'm just going to adjust the name. Now, this is just the nature of this font. Let me turn the grid on so you can really see here. So this font, if I line this up on this grid line, you can see there is a pretty clear, definite baseline for the font. So like the lowest point of all of the letters is falling on this line. But again, visually to me, if I don't have that grid on and I can't see that that's true, this lettering to me looks a little bit like the word name. That end there is sweeping up and to the right. So I'm going to turn it. I'm gonna rotate it just a teeny tiny bit so that it looks straight to me visually, because that's what matters. Doesn't matter if, you know, technically it is straight. If it looks wrong to me, I want to change it. So I'm going to go to my rotate tool up here. By default, this tool wants to rotate counterclockwise. So for me to get it to rotate clockwise, I'm going to do a negative just 1 degree, just a teeny tiny adjustment. And just that minor change makes this look perfect to me. It looks square to everything else. So now what I want to do is position this and resize a little bit. So I'm just going to drag this handle up, and this is scaling proportionally. And just, you know, again, visually kind of placing it what looks centered to me. So there's about, you know, the same kind of negative space around the letter here as there is on this side. And this looks pretty good to me. I think this is looking really nice and balanced. I like how things are placed. It looks good to me. So the next thing I want to do, I'm going to group my lettering back together so that these are all seen as one object in the design. And the next thing that I want to do is recolor my design. This design, as it was designed, has like 11 or 12 different shades of green in it. I don't know about you. I have a pretty good collection of embroidery thread. I do not have that many different shades of green that all play well together. So what I want to do is condense some of these layers so that I'm only using, you know, maybe 8 or 9 different shades of green. And these are all placed, they all stitch out in a very particular order. So when I'm working in the software, the advantage here is that I can change and audition each of these colors and really be able to see how things are going to look. So I'm going to go up to my design tab up top here and select thread colors. And here I'll be able to see all of the different colors that are in this design. And if I want to reassign one, I can click it and choose the type of thread that I want to use. So there's clearly tons of different brands of thread in here that you can pull from. I use mostly Isocord. So that's the color chart that I'm going to pull from, and I can just type in whatever color I want here. So let me think, one of my green shades, or you can also scroll through the list. So say I want this green to be, let's find a green. I want this one, this layer number 3, to actually be this Kelly green. I'll just double click it, and then when I hit apply, you'll see the visual change in the design. So go through your collection of threads, decide what colors you want to use, how many you really have to work from in your palette, and then you can go through the design and recolor accordingly. That takes some time, so I'm going to pull up a finished version. I actually, you know, time lapse, let's jump to a recolored version already. So through here, I went through my stash of threads and decided where I wanted the colors to lay for what I actually have on hand. So mine are all kind of a little bit more olivey green, and I like this more of a coral kind of colored flower. So this design is pretty much ready for me to stitch out. One more thing that I want to do, because so far we've just been really looking at the design visually and laying it out. Let's look at the logistics now of how we're going to hoop it and have it lay in our embroidery hoop at the machine. So you can click this little icon up here to show your embroidery hoop. You can right click it and it'll open up your hoop settings menu. So I'm working on that 790 plus, so I have a Bernina 7 series active here. You can choose whatever machine that you're working on, not just Bernina's. And then select the embroidery hoop that you want to use. If you're using that midi hoop or a maxi, or I'm actually going to use the jumbo hoop. You can use the jumbo on a 7 series. You just can't use the full embroidery field. And then you'll select the presser foot that you're going to use. We're using the 26. That's going to be your standard foot for machine embroidery. But if you were using like this free motion couching foot number 43, or the cutwork foot, those feet are actually wider, quite a bit wider than the 26. And so you'll see it brings in our embroidery field quite a bit because it needs that extra room around the edge of the hoop to stitch. So I'm going to go back, select my 26, and hit OK. So this area outlined is my embroidery field. My design is 8 inches wide and just shy of 8 inches tall. To give myself a little bit more wiggle room for positioning, I'm going to rotate this so that the under 8-inch dimension is running across the short width of my embroidery field. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, just going to give me a little bit, I mean, very little bit more wiggle room if anything needs to be rotated in positioning the design. So this is almost ready to stitch out. You'll want to save your working file, go and save the design. It'll save as an ART80, so you'll be able to do all kinds of editing if you need to come back into it later. One more thing that we want to do before we go to the machine is actually print out a template of this design. So if you go to print, I'll show you through print preview. This is what you can print from the embroidery software. So you can print out a 100% scale version of your design. So you can print this on just regular computer paper. OESD also has some stable stick template sheets. So they're an 8.5 by 11 printable template paper. They're like a big sticker, a real low tack sticker sheet, so you can print out your template and physically stick it to your fabric to check your positioning. But you'll print this out, doesn't have to be in color, you can send it in black and white. And then it also will print out this little information sheet. So it gives you your design size, the number of stitches, the machine file format. This one's interesting. It gives you the measurement of how much bobbin thread it thinks that you'll need. And then your color sequence. So the actual thread colors you'll use in the order you'll use them. So go ahead and print this out. And then send this design to a USB stick. So to do that, we'll just click the little machine icon here. And it's going to load. Maybe. There we go. And click the icon here. It looks like a little USB drive with the EXP because we're going to use an EXP file for our Bernina. And when you click that, it will automatically detect a USB stick plugged into your computer. Let me show you. So my USB drive here, there's my design file. We have the BMP bitmap file. So that's like the actual, it's a little picture that will show up in your machine when you go to load the design, the EXP, which is the actual stitch out file, and an INF file, which retains a lot of all of that color information. So all of these are ready to go. You can eject the drive from your machine and go and plug it in at your sewing machine. Okay, so that is our design setup. We designed our lettering with a custom font. we combined our designs, and we changed the design colors to look exactly how we want to stitch it out. The next thing we're going to do is actually embroider the design. So 4 key steps to any embroidery project. Number 1, prepare your fabric and stabilize it. Number 2, hoop that fabric. Number 3, placing the design. And number 4, actually stitching out. So you'll cut your fabric, and from your half yard or fat quarter if you want, you'll cut this to 15 inches wide by 18 inches tall. That is larger than the finished banner. The finished one that I made is about 12 by 13. I like a little wiggle room in there. So you'll want to cut that out. You'll cut a piece of fusible woven to the same size, excuse me, and let me go back here, and fuse that to the back, and then we're going to make some markings for aligning and placing our design. The markings that I made here, we have a seam allowance at the left and right sides and the bottom edge. I've marked my vertical center here and a nice large marking through the center to create a crosshair for the design itself. And then marking 3 inches up from the bottom right edge at the left and right side. So then you'll draw a line from that 3-inch point to the center and on either side. So that's going to create that point at the bottom of your banner. Then mark a line at the top edge for what you want your finished height of the banner to be. For the finishing that I did with that surged edge, I was fine with just surging across the top edge, and then I used a magnetic hanger. But if you wanted to use like a dowel and create a hanging sleeve, you'll want a larger space here. You'll want to make this a little bit longer. But then you'll make your horizontal center line at the halfway point between the bottom point of the banner and that finish line at the top. So mark those points and organize your threads. So pull out all of the physical threads that you're going to use in the design, and you can put them in whatever order you like, rainbow or the order that they'll be used in the stitch design. Next, we will hoop. So you'll want to hoop a piece of polymesh stabilizer. That is a medium weight cutaway stabilizer. And then position that printed template on your fabric. So when you print out the template, there is a vertical and horizontal center line. And I'm going to align that with the big crosshair that you mark on the fabric. So you can see the design centered and positioned exactly where you want it to go. Then you will lay your fabric in the hoop and make sure that that center crosshair is aligned with the center crosshair in the hoop template. So there's that clear plastic template that comes with your embroidery hoop. You'll want to align that crosshair that you drew with the one in the template. Again, I'm using the jumbo hoop on a 7 series, so the center of the hoop is not the center of my stitching area because my stitching area is a little smaller. So if you use the jumbo on the 7 series, the center is actually 2 grid lines to the right of the darker line center of the hoop template, if that makes sense. So your fabric is laid in the hoop, which is what we call floating in the hoop. And now we will take it to the machine and actually place the design. So we're going to use pinpoint placement to do this. And I'm going to jump back and forth a little bit with my machine simulator and some photos. So let me share my simulator. Okay, here is my BERNINA 790 Plus virtually. I'm going to open my design. I've plugged in the USB stick that I sent the design to. I'll go to the USB and select my design file. It's going to open in a maxi hoop by default because that is technically the smallest hoop that can fit this design. Then I will go to the information menu and select pinpoint placement. When I do that, the machine is going to tell me to attach my hoop to the machine. So I'm going to attach my jumbo hoop, and then the machine will initialize. So I'll hit my check mark, and now we are at pinpoint placement screen. I'm going to use the grid to place my design. This is not a super complicated design to place. We just want it to be centered. But if you were working with a design that you wanted to nest perfectly in, maybe not a square area, there's also the free point option, which lets you select any point on the design as your reference. So pinpoint placement, we're just going to stick to the grid today. I'm going to choose 2 points that fall on either of my horizontal or vertical crosshair markings on my fabric. But before I do that, I'm just going to select the different points and see where things are falling by default, just based on how I hooped the fabric. You can select any of these and the machine will move the hoop so that the needle is at that position and you can see exactly where it is. I'm going to go around and just check, these kind of points that are going to fall on those crosshairs, and even the center that should be straight on the center of my crosshair. And I was lucky when I hooped this. I did a pretty good job getting things square in the hoop. So I'm just going to select this top point here, and that should fall on my horizontal center line, which when I checked it, it was just a teeny tiny bit to the right of that marked line, just a little bit off from where I wanted it to be. So in pinpoint placement, you'll use the multifunction knobs to adjust the position at that point. So the top multifunction knob is going to move left and right. The bottom is going to move up and down. So I'm going to nudge this just to the left a little bit, and let's check our positioning. That's better, dead on. And I can use my hand wheel to lower the needle and see exactly where my needle is going to fall at that point. So with that, I'm going to set that point, and now that point is anchored. Any changes that I do now to this design, like I'm going to select this next point opposite of it, so it should also fall on that line, is going to basically swivel and hinge based on that set point. So I've selected that one, and let's see where this one's landing. Real close, real close. So I'm going to go back into my pinpoint placement, and I'm going to use, again, the left and right. I just want to kind of swing it up just a teeny tiny bit. And let's see where we're at now. Perfect. Now we're perfect. So now what I'm going to do is set my next point. And now this design is locked in place. And that's really all of the changing that I'm going to do to this design at the machine. I did so much in software, and I did it very quickly, so that when I load the design in the machine, it's pretty much just plug and play. A little bit for positioning, but the design is really ready to go. So I'm going to close out my information menu and go to stitch out. And now we will talk about the details of stitching out your design. There are 2 things that we want to activate from this stitch out screen for this project in particular. Number 1 is the basting box. So because we float that fabric in the hoop for this project, we're going to add a basting box before the design stitches out just to anchor the fabric in place. I chose to float the fabric for this one because it was just a little bit too narrow for the hoop that I chose, and it's more secure to me to float it and add that basting than have it potentially wiggle out of the embroidery hoop as it's stitching. So we're going to add a basting box, and that's just going to add a basting line around the perimeter of the design. And next we want to make sure that our jump stitch cutting is active. There will be some long jump stitches if you don't turn this on, like between the rows of the lettering. It's going to jump from the end of one row to the start of the next one. So you want to make sure those are trimming trimming your jump stitches. And those are the only changes we want to make to stitch out screen for this design. There's some other things in here that for other designs may be advantageous, but today we're going to keep it simple and just use those two things. So you'll press and hold that start stop button and let your machine stitch out. Change the thread colors as needed. The machine will tell you on screen exactly what color you need to put in next, but this design took about an hour for me to stitch out. Now, let's look at the finishing once the design is done stitching. So you'll remove your project from the hoop and trim that poly mesh down to the same size as your fabric, and then give the design a good press. You want to press your embroidery from the back side. I like to put it face down on one of those wool press mats. It has some squish to it. You can also use a pressing cloth. OESD has a great press cloth, but you put the right side down and it keeps your stitches from getting flattened by the iron. And when you do that, any sort of puckering that happens to the fabric in the stitching process is removed and it looks beautiful and smooth. Then cut your backing fabric to the same size as the main fabric. Again, that was 15 inches by 18 inches for my project. And we're going to draw those reference points again. So when you embroider on fabric, it tends to shrink in a little bit. If you're a quilter, you know that once you're done quilting a project or a quilt, it usually ends up just a little bit bigger than it started out. And embroidery is the same thing. So the initial markings that I drew were erased by my iron because I used a heat erasable pen. But now that this has been stitched out, I want to redraw those and make sure everything is exactly where I want it to be. So if the design ended up maybe not perfectly centered or maybe just a little bit wonky, you can adjust for that at this point. So again, the same markings, using the same kind of seam allowances on the sides to create that point at the bottom and determine the finished height or length of my banner. And now we are going to take this to our overlocker to finish the edge. I'm using a really cool stitch. It is a 2-thread blanket stitch actually on the overlocker. So I'm going to jump over to the overlocker simulator now to show you how we get that set up. This blanket stitch is essentially a flat lock stitch if you are familiar with overlock stitches, but the way that we achieve it is a little bit different. So at our L890, we have 2 different modes for operation. We have guided mode. So if you're a beginner and you're not super comfortable at your overlocker yet, guided mode is going to walk you through the steps to do any sort of stitch setup. Expert mode is kind of the shortcut. It'll still give you the same information, but in a much more condensed way. Because I don't know how familiar you all are with overlockers or this one in particular, I'm going to go through guided mode today to set up this stitch. When I select guided mode, I have some folders to choose my different stitches in the machine. We have overlock stitches, cover stitches, and combination stitches. If you are just kind of browsing, you can select and scroll through and see the names of stitches as well as an actual schematic view of what the stitch looks like. So if you aren't totally sure what you want to use, you can just browse through here. I know what stitch I'm looking for, so I'm going to select the magnifying glass here and type in 28 because my stitch is number 28 and hit the go button. So now it's telling me, all right, we've selected a 2-thread blanket stitch wide, a wide stitch, so I'm using the left needle, the LN here. And now this wizard is going to walk me through every single step to set up this stitch. The first one being to lift your presser foot, because that's going to open up your tension discs and get everything ready for threading and setup. I don't need to unthread anything because I'm just sitting down at my machine and it isn't threaded already. I'm going to use presser foot C11, which is the standard one on the L890, so I don't actually have to physically do anything here. Same with the presser foot pressure. 4 is the standard, and that's where I left my machine at. I'm going to put the left needle into the machine. So we have 5 different needle positions on an overlocker, or on a combination overlocker. We have 3 for our cover stitching and then 2 for overlock stitches. So LN is my left overlock needle. I just need 1 needle there. I want to make sure my cutting knife is activated, which it is. My cutting width by default is 6 millimeters. We're going to play with that a little bit, but we'll put it at 6 for now. I'm going to attach the knife cover insert, which is already set up on my machine because the last time I used it, I was doing overlock stitches. The upper looper is activated. Again, I left it on overlock, not cover stitch, so that's good to go. And then I will hook in the upper looper converter. If you have an overlocker, you might know this teeny tiny piece. It's very easy to lose. It gets hooked into the eye of the upper looper when you're using a 2-thread stitch where you're only using the lower looper. On the L890 and all of the L8 series machines, this upper looper converter is actually attached to the looper so that you can't lose it. So if I click this little animation, you can see how this swings into place. It's just on a little hinge. So you can flip it over when you need to use it, and when you don't, you can just swing it out of the way. But you can't lose it, and that's a great feature in my book, one of my favorites on these machines. Then I have my rolled hem selection lever at position O for overlock. And then the MTC, that micro thread control, is going to be at 0. So this was a whole bunch of steps and basically items on a checklist to make sure when I'm physically at my machine and doing this, I'm making almost no actual changes. It's just making sure that everything is in place the way it needs to be. The final thing to do is actually thread the machine. So I'm going to thread the left needle, and that's always going to go through my yellow thread path, and then the lower looper, which if you aren't sure how to thread your machine, we have more little handy animations here, and it'll show you all of the steps to thread that particular thread path. So for our loopers, you get to use that beautiful BERNINA one-step air threading. So all you need to do is activate the threading with that little switch, and then you'll hover the thread tail over the threading nozzle. When you press on your presser foot, it's actually going to pull the thread through for you. It's super easy, it's super fast. I love the air threading on these machines. And then we'll click the green check mark and we're ready to sew. Always with an overlocker, you want to test your stitch before you take it to your project. All fabrics sew a little bit differently. All threads sew a little bit differently. Even machines can vary a teeny tiny bit. So you want to make sure that this stitch is sewing out the way you really want it to before you commit to it. So when I tested my stitch, I found that I needed to loosen my needle threads even from 2, which is already pretty loose. I brought it all the way down to 1. and I actually raised my lower looper tension to 4.5. That gave me a really beautiful balanced stitch. You can also play with the stitch length. This blanket stitch, because it's a decorative technique, has a lengthened stitch. It's at 4, which is a pretty long or wide stitch. You can stitch it at the default. This is really just how you like it to look. You can make this stitch length a little bit smaller. The stitches will be closer together, or you can even make it wider. But the default here at 4 is actually a pretty good looking stitch for me. And at this point, I want to save this stitch because I have a feeling I'm going to be making a few more of these. I'm in the season of my life where there's lots of friends having babies. I'm going to go back to this project quite a bit. So I'm going to go into my personal memory with this little heart icon. I have it already saved from when I was practicing. I'm going to go into the heart for my personal memory and click the icon here to save my stitch. It'll give me a little preview what the stitch looks like. I'll click it and I can type in a name. Let's say banner. Hit my green check, and here is where I can adjust any manual settings that take place on the machine. So when I tested this, I actually really liked a wider cutting width on my stitch. So I liked it at about 8. So I'm gonna save my stitch with this wider cutting width. And I also bumped up my MTC a little bit at +1. Otherwise, all of the default settings are exactly how I like them. I can hit this green check mark and this stitch is now saved. So when I go to my personal memory, it's right there for me to come back to, even if I turn my machine off and come back. Okay, so our stitch is set up. Now let's take a look at this actual technique. To create this blanket stitch, like I said, it's basically a flat lock. So I'm gonna serge 2 layers together, which really one of my layers is 3 because it's my embroidered fabric, my poly mesh, and the backing. And then I'm gonna lay a water-soluble stabilizer on top. Try to take a picture. It's very hard to photograph clear things because it's clear stabilizer. You want to start with a really nice long thread chain of your stitch, and then lay the stabilizer on top of your fabric. So you can see it's kind of shiny here. And remember we drew the lines for our finished banner? We didn't cut those because I'm going to have my overlocker cut them. There's no sense in me cutting it out to shape just to have the overlocker trim it again. So I can get really clean, precise lines if I just draw it out and have the overlocker cut it for me, because it's going to cut that edge and finish it at the same time. So I'm going to place my fabric under the presser foot, and with that stabilizer on top, align that drawn line with the cutting blade. So my blade is going to cut precisely on that line. And we can see that a little bit closer up here. It's just nested, it's falling perfectly in front of the cutting blade, and I'm going to stitch and cut at the same time. When I'm done stitching that side, I'm going to start with those short edges that create the little bottom point of the banner. Your stitch is going to look like this. You're going to see your looper threads on the top side. I used a really dark kind of olivey green that matched my backing fabric. You're only really going to see looper thread on the top side at this point. But you're going to take that stabilizer and pull it open, and then your needle threads will be visible. And that's what creates the like ladder look of a blanket stitch on the overlocker. And then the stabilizer is perforated by all of those little stitches, and you can just tear it away. If any remains in the seam, you can take like a little wet Q-tip and run it along the edge there, and it'll totally dissolve. So I'm going to repeat the process with the next short side of my banner. Once again, lining that line up right with the cutting blade. And I'm going to sew. I have see my looper threads. And when I open that up, I can see the needle threads for that really pretty blanket stitch. We're going to repeat the process on the left and right sides. Again, serge the side, open it up, and then remove the stabilizer, and then finally run across the top side. And that's it with the overlocker. We're almost done here, just a couple details to finish. Take those nice long thread chains that you left and weave them in to the stitch on the back side of the fabric, of the banner rather, and then give them a trim and just secure those threads with a little bit of fray check. So everything will hold in place and keep from unraveling. And that's it. Like I said, I used a little magnetic hanger for mine. These are really great. It's 2 pieces here, so there's a wood piece on the front and back with magnets, and you just clamp the fabric between the 2 pieces, and it hangs pretty securely. I have a bunch, I love these. I use them for tons of art in my house. So that's it. That is our banner. We are fully constructed. I'm going to give some contact information, a couple little things, and then we can go to questions. Because I know we're rounding out the hour. Here's my information, Mun's Instagram, if you want to be my friend on Instagram. If you have questions, you can email me. I am going to give you guys a handout and the actual embroidery files that I used. I'll give you that ART file so you don't have to stitch out baby's name on your banner. You can change it to whatever you want it to be. And those will be online. If you go to this link, bit.ly/EMB banner, you can find those. They're not up right this minute. They will be later today. If there are any questions today, I want to make sure I answer those and include them in the handout before they send that out. So, Randy, if you want to pop back on here, do we have any questions?
Actually, no. The question tab is like empty, so I guess.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Like I said, if anybody does have questions, feel free to email me. Again, this is my name. It's not an easy one to spell, but there it is. You can send me an email or message me on Instagram, and I will be happy to chat. That's it. I think we're ready to wrap up.
All right. Thank you all for coming, and yeah, see you later, Hayley.
Thanks, Randy. Have a good Friday, everyone.